We are live talking hoops today. We promised you a podcast Thursday. We didn't know Josh Kroenke was going to go and announce a head coach right when we normally go live on our podcast. So here we are a couple hours later on the Mile High Hoops podcast. It's Jake Shapiro and Aniello Piro. And AP, David Adelman is the next head coach of the Denver Nuggets. It comes as no surprise to either of us who have been talking about this, expecting it all week. Maybe it came as a surprise that it happened 1 minute before Josh Kroenke got up to the podium and started talking. Thank you, Shams Charania. But nonetheless, no surprise. And ultimately, I don't know if it's the complete right hire, but I feel pretty good about giving the keys over to David Adelman, given what we've seen. And I think you do as well.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with it. I just would have liked them to do due diligence and just, interview some other candidates and just kind of go around the league and make sure that he is the best choice for the job. But, we'll talk about it throughout the course of the show. I'm also kind of thinking that they're going to stay internal for the general manager and the front office positions that are open as well. But yes, it was interesting. You walked in the media room and like 30 seconds later, like someone says like Adelman got the job and then Josh rolls right in. So it was kind of like boom, 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 boom. All in one today, but congratulations to David Adelman. I mean, I think he did a pretty good job, all things considered, in his 3 regular season games. And then, of course, the 14 playoff games where he was the captain of the ship here. So he has a full offseason. Josh Kroenke had some interesting thoughts about letting him build out his staff, why he wanted to hire Adelman so quickly, and we'll dive into it here on the pod.
It felt like Josh took this process and this approach very similarly to how I've talked about how I would have taken it on this podcast.
Right.
In terms of, I'm not going to give Josh the job, I'm not going to give David the job. He's not going to be kind of who I think. It's just, a short-term thing. He's deserved this opportunity. We know he's going to be a head coach somewhere across the league. Why don't we just see how this goes? Because it's not going anywhere. And then because David did such a good job in his 2 rounds of the postseason in his last 3 games and galvanizing the Nuggets, when Josh Kroenke thought they were going home in the play-in, and instead they take the best team in the NBA to 7 games in the second round, I think it was impossible to almost not hire him. And that's the thing is that's kind of how Josh made it out to be is, look, I was not planning on hiring David Adelman. He didn't say that clearly, but he kind of said it in between the lines. But David made it so everyone saw how attractive this job was and how attractive this opportunity was because he earned it. And that to me was what I saw, at least following this team over the last few weeks. It's not revisionist history. He completely changed the outcome of this season. And for that alone, he deserves to be a head coach in this league. And the more you think about it, it's like, okay, Chris Quinn, Mike Nori, all these other assistant coaches around the league. And I just talked to a coaching source. It's like, okay, those guys are great coaches, but they haven't coached any playoff games. David Adelman just went through the war. So unless you're hiring literally like Jeff Van Gundy, there was not a better option out there than David Adelman.
Yeah, and to go back to the point that you said of like, he earned the job with his performance in the playoffs. Like I subscribe to that a fair amount, but I also think the biggest thing that Josh Kroenke, kind of reading between the lines here, came away impressed with was how the players responded to him and the respect that he commanded within that locker room and kind of like the overall, not tranquility, but like the players were on board, I guess is what I'm trying to say. He had earned the trust of the players, which had kind of been lost with Michael Malone there towards the end. And, he also kind of hinted at it. And we talked about it as soon as Michael Malone was fired, that it's not a bad idea to get David Adelman a look, because he's a guy who's been, thrown out in NBA coaching circles before. So there's no saying that, he would have been here forever, even if you could bring him back as an assistant, however it may have played out. So clearly he did well in the audition, well enough to say that, hey, like, let's give this guy some resources. Let's give this guy some help and see what he could do. And away we go now, Jake.
And there has been such a talent drain, by the way, in this staff that just doesn't get talked about a lot. Jordy Fernandez, Chris Finch, Mike Nori, Wes Unseld Jr. Like, there have been some big name Nuggets assistant coaches that have left for other opportunities the last few years. And I think that's part of it is those guys have generally gone on to be successful. Wes Unseld was dealt a very tough situation, so I'm going to say that one doesn't really count. But elsewhere, these guys have done pretty well. So I think maybe Josh, while it is the cheap option, perhaps, I don't even know the details on the contract yet, it might also be the right option. And just because it's the cheap way doesn't mean it's not the right way. Like, you could go out and spend a lot of money. It could be the wrong thing to do, like what Phoenix has done. So I'm not going to fault them when I think it was the right decision. I'll fault them for not re-signing KCP and call them cheap for that, because that is cheap. But this is not that situation in my mind. The one problem I have with this whole process and how it's gone, they had 7 weeks to hire a GM. Mm-hmm. They could have hired a GM and then gotten on the same page with the GM before they hired a head coach together. Josh Kroenke has gone out and picked his head coach. Now, in the NFL, a lot of the head coaches now just kind of work directly for the owner, and the GM kind of works in tandem with the head coach. So maybe this is the Nuggets restructuring a little bit, but under the old philosophy, AP, hiring your coach before your GM, something we've seen the Nuggets do, is normally not something that works out well.
Yeah, and it was a question, like I was doing all the social content for us here at Denver Sports, but that was a question that if I had the opportunity, I wanted to ask. And I'm surprised, frankly, that it wasn't asked about, like, why did you feel comfortable hiring a head coach before you hire a GM or a president of basketball operations? And frankly, I think it's because they're also going to go internal with the front office openings as well. We'll get to that here in just a moment. But yeah, it's interesting. And I also think, like, not to give, it's not a pat on the back, but to give the Nuggets a little bit of a break, just because everyone's like, this MPJ contract so bad. Why did you sign Jamal Murray to this max contract extension? And maybe it doesn't apply so much to Jamal right now. But I do think that Josh brought up a good point, that the roster as constructed was built under a previous CBA. And so a reason why there's a lot of these issues with the roster, these questions on the roster, is because of where they were when they made these decisions and how the landscape of the league has changed. And now they're trying to accelerate that process a little bit. Sounded like they're going to take a look at maybe trying to trade in to get a draft pick this year. Sounds like they're going to, check all their boxes as well when it comes to free agency. And Bruce Brown also, within about 15 minutes of David Adelman being announced as the head coach of the Denver Nuggets, reposted it on his Instagram account. So keep an eye out over there.
Just some more on David Adelman before we get to some roster stuff and such, because I do think that is obviously the most pressing stuff outside of who is actually leading and making these decisions.
Yep.
David did some really cool things in the playoffs. That zone defense, I thought, was really impressive. The Nuggets had no business taking the Thunder to 7 games, especially with their forwards had 6 healthy limbs by the end of that series, AP. They were not healthy. That Thunder team is so much better than the Nuggets. They are. That Thunder team is way better. And because they can come at you in waves, because of the depth, the Nuggets were only in that series because of David Adelman played his own defense. Who is running zone defense in the NBA now? And the answer is very, very few teams. It's like legitimately the Miami Heat do it for some spurts. The Celtics run a trapping scheme. Like, it's very few teams. So the Nuggets ran a zone defense, and everyone credits that for changing their defensive schematics and changing their defense all around, right? That's not something they practiced until the last couple weeks. It's not like in training camp they were running zone defense and they were all in sync. Right? So right. Michael Porter Jr., who was never running zone defense at any point in his life, except for a couple possessions here and there, had to learn how to play zone defense. And he got better. And if you watch the series back, with one shoulder, he found a way to get better throughout that series. So now give me a whole offseason in a training camp of that. And it gives the Nuggets a very good option to play defense with, even though they don't have correct personnel. And we watched the Nuggets struggle on defense all year going, it's a personnel issue, it's a personnel issue. I still think it's a personnel issue. But David Adelman found a way to scheme to his personnel, and to me, that's the sign of a really smart coach, AP.
Yeah, no, and I think, Josh also kind of talked about, things that we've discussed about how, he was on the radar for a lot of these different teams already. So that's part of the reason why he made him the interim coach and obviously earned his keep there with his stint. But also, like, Josh had a quote, something along the lines of, like, he was more prepared than I think people thought. And I think you saw that on display with your point to the zone defense, and going back to the point that I made earlier about the overall communication and the respect that he's been able to garner from the players within that locker room. So, yeah, I'm excited, and I agree with you. I do think it's still a personnel thing, but, Deron Holmes coming back next year, like, how does that impact the team? That's almost like a free agent acquisition in and of itself, just because you didn't have him at all last season. And, we'll see how aggressive they are. via trade, via draft potentially, and via free agency. So I think, look, again, and I know that, like, I posted this stuff on Denver Sports Social. Like, there's a lot of Nuggets fans that are like, this is terrible. He's Josh Kroenke and KSE are the worst ownership group in sports. Like, I really don't think
there's a worse ownership group down the street.
Well, they don't even get talked about unless it's in a completely negative way. But yeah, no, I mean, I just think you have to be. Here's the thing. I don't know if you should be thrilled if you're a Nuggets fan. I think you could feel content, though. Like, I don't think that this move, like, I'm not like sitting here like, let's go. Like, David Adelman is the coach, championship coming. Like, I don't feel that way. But I think he did enough in the playoffs to say, okay, let the chips fall where they may. See how it goes.
Yeah, and I said it on the last podcast. I think he might be a ceiling raiser, and that's what the Nuggets need in this circumstance. And opposite of Malone being the hard-ass coach from New York who, you know, is the coach's son and blah, 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 they're going for the laid-back West Coast kid who's also a coach's son. But he's a West Coast kid, and I think he communicates with people a lot differently. I've noticed it, at least in how he talks to the media. I've had sources on this who have been big fans of David Adelman for years who think he did a tremendous job in a couple months. And I think one of his big objectives for next year is going to be developing the bench. Like, the Nuggets only have so many pathways to look externally on their roster. Like, honestly, the biggest thing about the Nuggets season next year will come down to how good are Julian Strawther and Peyton Watson. And I think David Adelman has already shown a more willingness and a longer leash to give those guys. And I think it's going to make the regular season less meaningful next year, something we talked about on the last podcast, but it's going to make those guys more impactful. Honestly, that one quote Josh had about giving those guys more playing time sounded like he was listening to the Mile High Hoops podcast on Tuesday. Because we had that thought, and I think that's the thought that's not, and it's not my original thought. That was actually a thought from a source, just to put my cards out there. That thought is something that's is percolating throughout the Nuggets organization. So the fact that David Adelman is on board with that, to me, is a very positive sign, because it's one of their biggest approaches for this offseason and next season is development of this bench and trying to find a way to get deeper. I just wrote the story on denversports.com. Josh Kroenke agrees with Nikola Jokic. The Nuggets need to find a way to get deeper. I think I might have lost AP there for a second. But on the depth thing, on depth, it's looking like, to me, that the idea that the Nuggets trade for or go oust MPJ or get rid of Nikola Jokic or something like that, obviously they're not getting rid of Nikola Jokic, but make a major move, right? That, to me, seems a lot less likely today than maybe people were talking about 24, 48 hours ago. Josh Kroenke talking about the depth, making sure that Nuggets fans know that they heard Nikola Jokic and wanting to get that depth, getting to get stronger and just finding ways to survive those bench minute stretches. That's going to be such a key for next year, right? And to me, having David there to liaison that plan and execute that plan is going to be a major part of the Nuggets season next year. So that's one of the things that stuck out to me. He basically said that, you know, internal development and development is going to be their main pathway to move forward. And Aniello did just point out that they did kind of hint that they're going to be looking to trade into the draft. But again, that's another player they're going to need to develop. And to me, that's something maybe they'll look at in terms of a second round pick. It's not going to be a first round pick that they find a way to get with, you know, trading into the draft. But AP, I was just talking about, after hearing what Josh said today, do you think it's more likely than you thought on Tuesday, more likely or less likely that they trade Michael Porter Jr. or a big name player this summer?
Less likely. And you know, the more that I think about it, I think you have to kind of like separate the emotion from the facts. The dude's contract is borderline untradeable. Just because of the way that he's played down the stretch, like this year as a whole, the injury concerns. And that's the thing. Like, let's say Michael Porter Jr. even had like the greatest, like best season of his career. From what I've been told and talking with people in and around the Nuggets and around the league as well, is that there's a lot of teams that still view Michael Porter Jr. as damaged goods because he's one slip, one back injury away. Remember, the reason why he fell to the Nuggets in the first place was because of the injury concern. So I think teams, even if Michael Porter Jr. is coming off a career year, would still be reluctant to trade for him just because of that, unless they're getting him for next to nothing. So that point aside, though, it sounded like Kroenke and Adelman are on board with trying to maximize the roster and adding a piece or two along the way, which I don't think is the wrong idea. I mean, you and I were talking about they're one player away. So if you run it back as is, bring in a Bruce Brown type potentially, maybe, you find yourself in a better position come this time next year.
And it sounds like Bruce Brown wants to be here, at least from what he posted on social media today.
How can he not? And remember, it was so funny when he left. Like, that was the thought of, like, he goes and gets his bag for a few years and then ends up coming back here on a minimum. I mean, for him to be wearing an Avalanche hat, posting that on Instagram, and then posting the Adelman graphic from Shams on ESPN within an hour of it happening, I can't tell you a player that's a free agent that just does that. Like,
and not only did he show up to a Nuggets playoff game, he went into the locker room and started talking to guys after they lost and was literally picking their heads up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we don't know. Maybe some team makes a big offer for him. He hasn't been playing well. Like, I am 80% sure he's coming back, or at least he's telling his agent, get on the phone. I want to come to Denver.
Okay. Given where Bruce has played the last year and how he's played, which yikes. Do you feel comfortable giving him the full $5 million taxpayer mid-level exception, the only thing the Nuggets have besides a minimum contract they can offer Bruce? Or are you only taking Bruce if he's taken that minimum contract?
And what did they give Dario Saric?
The taxpayer mid-level exception for $5.5 million.
So it literally can't get worse than that. Literally.
Okay.
And from what I know about Bruce Brown, like, he likes to have fun, like, not in a bad way, but like he won the championship. And I'm not saying he just kind of pieced and kind of coasted, but he wanted to get his bag. He got his bag. I think he comes back to Denver and the head's on straight. Not that it was off, but like, I don't think he's playing the way that he did. I think the last 2 years.
Well, he got traded mid-season from Indiana to Toronto, then Toronto to New Orleans. Clearly the people in those organizations didn't have any value for him. Like,
exactly. I think he just checked himself out a little bit mentally. He's like, all right, I got my bag. I'm going to go out there and hoop.
Right, and he got his bag for a team, by the way, that's going to 2 straight conference finals. That's who he thought he was playing for the next 2 years. Like, he signed to play there for 2 teams he thought was going to go to the conference finals, and then he gets shipped to Toronto and then shipped to New Orleans, who have stunk. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it's that bad if you end up signing Bruce for $5 million. That's actually the initial mechanism that got him here, is that taxpayer mid-level exception. Right. So it'd be funny that's the
what's old is new again.
Yeah, just run it back. Way back the same way as possible. I thought it was interesting that Josh Kroenke basically said Game 7, whatever. We lost that series, Game 4, Game 5. Also basically said we could have been swept. We could have won that series 4-1, which I think a lot of people are kind of agreeing on.
We talked about that God knows how many times. Like,
yeah. And you know what he's listening to for sure is the press conferences. He might not be listening to our show. I don't know for sure, but he is listening to our press conference, or to us in the press conferences, because he said today, I just talked about the depth thing with Nikola Jokic, and he heard Jokic loud and clear. But he said this again today, which is again fascinating, which is, I owe it to Nikola Jokic to chase this championship. So to me, when he says that, the Nuggets are committing to spending the $36 million luxury tax bill that they are currently scheduled for next year as a repeater team. They will go into the second apron if they believe that sets them up correctly. Part of them not going into the second apron with KCP last summer, I think partially that was them being cheap, A, but I thought a lot of that box B was Calvin Booth really wanted that flexibility to make other moves in case the Nuggets needed to make them, and the second apron doesn't allow you to do that. So I thought that was a little case A, case B, whereas in this scenario, especially looking into next year, not 25, 26, but 26, 27, where Porter's still on contract, Gordon's contract kicks in, and CB's extension will kick in, the Nuggets are clearly going to be a second apron team that year unless something drastic happens. So I think that the Nuggets are in a situation going into this year where Josh Kroenke, who has said it in not so many words, might just say, whatever, we ball.
Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it when it comes to that. I agree with your thought process. It's just like, let's see them really go into the second apron. I mean, you joined me on the Fan yesterday, filling in for my guy, Zach Bai, and I didn't realize how many teams were in the second apron. For a minute there, I thought it was just Phoenix. I mean, it's Phoenix, New York. There's 3 or 4 different teams in the second apron. So I thought that Phoenix was kind of on this island alone, and that maybe in and of itself would have been a built-in excuse for the Nuggets and Josh Kroenke to not pay that much money, because you kind of see how it's messed up with Phoenix. But you see what's going on with New York right now. You see what's going on with some of these other teams. I'm not going into the second apron for the sake of going into the second apron, because I also do like the idea of having that flexibility. But if the stars align the right way, I mean, you got to go in it, right? Like, and I know it's expensive, but these guys own freaking Walmart. like they have more money than they know what to do with. I don't know. Point being, I'll believe it when I see it, Jake.
Yeah, second apron teams are Boston, Phoenix, Minnesota, Milwaukee, and New York. So 2 of the 4 teams that are left, the team that was the title favorite, and the team that is in a very similar situation to you with Giannis Antetokounmpo comparatively to Nikola Jokic. So, but I do think, speaking of that team, by the way, Milwaukee, based off the things Josh said, in a common narrative the last couple of weeks I've seen developing is, how do the Nuggets not end up like Milwaukee? I think for those people that are scared of that, Josh Kroenke said all of the things today that make you believe the Nuggets know what Milwaukee's mistakes were and aren't going to be following that path.
Yeah, and I think that's wise. Obviously, it's I like Milwaukee. There's no ill will towards Milwaukee, but they've kind of showed us what to do and what not to do, when it pertains to the sim situation that we're kind of facing here. But, the one thing that I will say about Josh Kroenke too, I believe everything he says. I think he's very candid when he meets with the media. I don't think it's a lot of PR. I mean, he even took that moment there at the end of the press conference when PR called for it to end to make sure that the reporter got the follow-up question in as well. I think he cares, and I think he's very honest and truthful with his words. And because of that, I think you've got to at least be optimistic about how they're going to handle this offseason. I understand, you and I have talked about, is this the biggest offseason in Denver Nuggets history? Well, one of the 2 biggest questions of this offseason has already been answered. And I know it's maybe not the most exciting hire in David Adelman, but it could very well end up being the right hire.
There's a pathway here, just honestly, where I see David Adelman not keeping this job through this time next year, where it doesn't go well. And the Nuggets have to panic and hire somebody else because the pressure with Jokic. Mm-hmm. But the more likely path in my mind is that David Adelman's going to be the head coach for the Denver Nuggets for a long time. And to me, I think they're going to be competitive for a long time. And I think their chances of a championship are still around. I talked about this on Tuesday with you in the office. I was just doing a show that everyone should have been listening to, but it was just for you and one of our buddies.
You were. It was incredible to watch you in your bag like that.
The East sucks. The East really sucks, and it's going to suck next year. Milwaukee, honestly, should just hold it together and just hope, because, Tatum going down, the Cavs have some big questions. The Knicks are designed for a 1-year run. Pacers will be back. Detroit will get better, but it's the East. It's just, in Philadelphia will get better with maybe Embiid. I don't even know. They have the 3rd pick. You look around the West, and your initial reaction every offseason is, the West gets better. The West gets better. Everyone's getting better with the Nuggets. It's stupid. The Nuggets are at the spot they're at because they bring back their core, and they rely a lot on that cohesiveness and the communication they have built in. Oklahoma City will be better next year, even if they don't win more games, because they will have been galvanized by this entire situation, no matter how this ends. Now, will they be a champion looking for a repeat and they have to end in the second round like every other championship team for the last couple of years? I don't know. Minnesota has Naz Reid and Julius Randle as free agents. Those are the 2 top teams in the West. Dallas will get better because of Cooper Flag. Now, Kyrie Irving might miss the entire season, so they might not have a point guard. So I don't know if they're serious. Phoenix is not getting better. The Lakers might find a center, but they're probably going to trade Austin Reeves, who, by the way, is really good, and that's probably a mistake. The Clippers, I don't have the faith that they're going to bring back that they're going to be the same team that they were this past year. The Kings are a disaster. The Warriors don't know what they want to do. Portland will get better, but it's not a contender. I don't know where these teams are that people are scared of. The Nuggets still have the best 4-man lineup out of any of these teams in the West. And Christian Brown might prove to be the right person to be that 5th player in time. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But
Well,
you have to give them a chance. Like, the Nuggets are positioned well to be competitive and take advantage of a season like this one where some bad things happen to other teams. The problem is the worst thing happened to the Nuggets, which is they had to fire their coach with 3 games left in the season because it was going so poorly. So while all these other teams, the path did open up, the path was never really open for the Nuggets now that we're on the other side of this, for me and my perspective, because they had so much initial turmoil. And just talking to some people that have been around the teams, they're like, man, the last 2 months have taken years off my life. Yeah, no doubt. Like, no doubt. I feel that from the outside.
oh, you're going to tell me twice, brother. No, but I also think the other thing is like people – like grass isn't always greener, right? Type dynamic. And I think people get frustrated because now it's 2 years of this same core where, yes, they are still on paper the best, starting 5 in the NBA, all things considered. But I think people, just are annoyed at Michael Porter Jr., are annoyed at Jamal Murray, and sometimes rightfully so. And I understand that MPJ was, a bit banged up there down the stretch, but and I think that's why the big thing here is, Jake, like what we talked about on, what was that, Tuesday? Like, you don't need to be the best team in the Western Conference. Like look at what's happened to Minnesota right now. Like, I think the key for Denver is don't avoid the play-in, stay healthy, and build chemistry. Like, those are the 3 things that I think need to happen for them next season if they want to have a legitimate chance to win an NBA championship and, make some minor roster tweaks here or there. But, it's interesting. It really is. And this move today to hire David Adelman does not come as a surprise to me whatsoever. And I think it's just like, I can't really give a firm take on it because I think what David Adelman had to deal with the last 3 games in the playoffs is just unfair. And it's also unprecedented that it's like you get an idea, but I think I have like a 70% of idea of what David Adelman could be as a head coach in this league. And now we'll find out next season.
Well, you want him to develop guys and you want him to build chemistry.
Right.
On building chemistry, the guys want David Adelman to be the coach,
yes.
So that helps you build chemistry. On development, we've already seen him play the younger guys a little bit more and not be afraid to take vets out of the lineup. So while it might be nice on paper to have a former championship head coach come in here like Mike Budenholzer or someone, honestly, there might not be someone better for this job in this circumstance than David Adelman. And it's not to say it's going to win, it's going to work out with a championship. But as we sit here right now, and as I've looked at the coaching candidates since the season ended on Sunday, I really had a hard time finding someone better positioned to get this job than David Adelman. And I think that's what happened with Josh Kroenke the last couple of days as well, because he did not want to initially give this job to David Adelman, but David Adelman ran with it, took it, and proved to deserve it. So I'm fine with it where we're at. And we'll come back on Tuesday, 8 p.m., the Mile High Hoops podcast, and we'll talk about the roster a little bit more because Josh Kroenke dropped a lot of nuggets. The GM search is underway. I am with you. I kind of think that they're going to go internal, but they haven't done it yet. So we'll find out. And anything more to add?
No, man. I just, here we go. Right back into it. The offseason was fun to be back at Ball Arena today, even though it was for a couple of hours. And we'll see, man. I think one last thing that I would add is Josh talked about how, there wasn't a moment in time in which he decided to make David Adelman the head coach, but I do think it came when they beat the Clippers. I think once they beat the Clippers and then to subsequently push Oklahoma City to 7 games, I think showed enough to Josh to feel confident in the move. And I'm a David Adelman believer. I think he can do a good job. Let's see how it shakes out.
Hot take. He had made the decision to hire David Adelman when they got the series to 7 games against the Clippers. I think he made that decision when the Nuggets went up 3-2 against the Clippers. Personally, That's not based off anything. That's just kind of how I read it and from people.
And the one other thing that I like, and I was a Malone guy, man. I loved Michael Malone. But
Me too.
The one thing I do like about David Adelman is even after those blowout losses, to the Clippers, what was that, Game 3, Game 2, and Game 7 against the Thunder, take Game 7 out of it for just a moment. I love the way that Adelman carried himself. Like, Malone would have come up in those press conferences like red, like so upset. And David Adelman, after a win, after a loss, was the same person. And I think that's really important.
And Malone got into very dangerous territory earlier this season when he started calling out Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray. To me, that was the first sign that things were coming undone.
I forgot about that.
Yep.
Forgot about that.
So he's Aniello Piro. I'm Jake Shapiro. This is the Mile High Hoops podcast. We will talk to you again on Tuesday. Enjoy your holiday weekend. You can bet your behind me and Aniello will be. Talk to you soon.
Later, y'all.